In today's episode, we're talking to Simon. And it's really hard for me to express the gratitude, the huge amount of gratitude that I have for Simon stepping up and moving forward, stepping forward to talk. It's really hard to talk.
Yeah, it can be.
But by facing these uncomfortable situations, it's through the discomfort that we heal and we grow. And also through talking, we're going to create a greater understanding of the impact of addiction on families, and potentially one day break the stigma and the shame around the illness of addiction. So welcome, Simon. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
That's great to have you. I know it's not easy. It is blooming hard. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Sure.
So before we get into your interview, I think it's really important to explain to everyone how we met.
Okay.
Now, I've known Simon for a really long time.
Don't
and actually, Simon,
admit how long,
remember.
Please. That would be bad
I
form.
think I think it's 22 years.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. So Simon and I used to work together a really long time ago. But this is the first time that we've talked about this shared experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Loving someone who had an addiction. We didn't know. You didn't know what was going on in my life, and I didn't know what was going on in yours. And I think that's really important to highlight because that's pretty common.
Yes, I think it is, yeah.
It stays hidden.
It does. Yeah, it is one of those hidden things that, I mean, as you say, you want to talk about stigma and shame. It is one of those things that generally is always pushed to the background, isn't it? You know, you don't walk into your friend's house and introduce your loved one as an addict. Do you know what I mean? It's something that's always looked out for over your shoulder as you're in a situation, but never really spoken about.
So, tell us a little bit about your situation and tell us about your dad, because it was your dad with the addiction.
Yeah. So my dad was an entertainer by trade. He played piano and sang. Before I came along, he was doing summer seasons. He did a stint over in Germany doing various shows and stuff. And he was an old school rock and roller, you might say. Loved his 50s and 60s rock and roll. So he was basically constantly in an environment where he'd be playing, singing, someone saying, "Hey Scott, do you want a pint?" I'd be like, "Yeah, of course, yeah." So, you know, he was always around alcohol. But not really as a problem. You know, it was all part and parcel of the deal. And, you know, I remember days when I was young where mum and dad would have incredible parties or barbecues at the house or whatever, and would like get through a lot of alcohol. But it wasn't a problem. It wasn't every day. It wasn't a need, if you know what I mean. It was just part and parcel of the actual life they led. So yeah, that dad from that point of view had always had this love of music, had just basically done what he wanted to do for a living. So he did the job he loved. And I think when that stopped, I think that's when the alcohol became a problem.
Mm-hmm. So thinking back to those early days is probably a lot of good memories of music, parties, fun.
Yeah, I mean, literally to the point where we would have a barbecue in the back garden and the piano would be out and there'd be music blaring, and people we didn't know would randomly turn up at the house and ask to join in. You know, things like that happened. It was a fun childhood in that respect. But obviously that was, as I say, you know, as I got towards my teenage years, the need, shall we say, the demand for rock and roll singers kind of hit a rocky patch, for want of a better term. And I think really he just had to get a proper job. And I think, you know, really the proper job, the not being able to do what he loved, I think all that pressure that he was never used to, and I think that really was what turned, you know, a sociable drinking habit into an addiction, really.
It's interesting to hear you talk about your dad, and one of the things that we tend to do is we tend to try to understand why they did what they did.
Yeah.
And we can hear that through how you're talking about the change in your dad. But let's talk about you
Sure.
now. So when things started to change, you said that you were in your
In my
your
teens, yeah, it was sort of around 13 really. So a really sort of important time in my life. I was having a hard time at school, and not academically necessarily, but just peer group wise. I was bullied. You know, this isn't anything unusual, I don't think, for a lot of kids, to be honest. But you know, I didn't feel like I had my dad there to talk to about this. I couldn't open up to him. I couldn't discuss things with him. You know, my dad, at the best of times, was very old school. He was adopted at quite a young age, I believe, and had a fairly rough childhood himself. So he was very much coming from the point of view of children should be seen and not heard. And he wasn't one for showing his emotions either. So for me, as what I would say is quite a fairly sensitive kid, to then have this additional barrier of, I want to talk to my dad, hey dad, and the first words out of his mouth were slurred. It was like I just shut him off basically, and just closed down and dealt with everything myself. And I think really that's when the rot set in with our relationship, because it was a case of any time I wanted to talk to him, I could see he'd had a drink, and that was it. My back went up straight away as soon as I knew he'd had a drink. It was like, didn't want to talk.
So how did that make you feel, seeing your dad that way?
It's a really, really hard thing to nail down. It's such a mixed bag of emotions. There's anger, there's shame, I guess, as well. I mean, you know, certainly later on in life when I would introduce people to him, or we'd be out and then he'd start drinking a lot and, you know, become that sort of embarrassing dad. I know dad's meant to be embarrassing anyway. I'm really good at that. But, you know, that point where you step over the mark and it just becomes, you know, something beyond a joke. And also, you know, just loneliness, I suppose, as well. I mean, you know, I was always reasonably close to my mum, but I hadn't got that male role model in my life anymore, really. As far as I was concerned, I didn't anyway. You know, I just had mum, and, you know, dad was sort of this background figure now that I didn't feel I could relate to or talk to or anything. So it was a really hard time for me, and I mean, you know, at the end of the day, I guess it's shaped who I am now. But at the time, it really was quite hard.
So when you say that you feel it's shaped the way that you are today, what do you mean by that? What do you think why are you the way that you are because of that experience?
Probably a number of things. I think I'm quite, well, I guess the first thing is I was, from that point onwards, always determined not to be addicted to anything. And I found it really easy to recognise the signs of addiction in other people and in myself. So if at any point I thought, you know, this, why am I doing this? You know, even like playing video games or things like that. If I'm like, why am I staying up till 2 o'clock in the morning to play this game? This is ridiculous. You know, this feels a bit like it might be taking over. Do you know what I mean? Things like that. But also, I think emotionally, because I had to deal with everything on my own, I think to some extent I've become a lot stronger because of that. Emotionally, perhaps. I don't know. I like to think I was always a really sensitive kid, and I like to think I've carried that forward, but I also have the ability to sort of lock it away if necessary. So if I have to deal with something that's not particularly easy, then I can deal with it, and then I can, now at least I can talk about it later, as we're demonstrating now. But for a long time, I think I shut out a lot of things for a very long time. I certainly didn't deal with the relationship I didn't have with my dad.
And so how long did that go on for, Simon, the shutting him out?
probably until about 4 or 5 years ago.
Mm.
He passed 2 years ago, just gone. Um, and I shut him out for a very long time. He got cancer. Um, Funnily enough, nothing to do with the drinking, but it was lung cancer and cancer of the colon, I believe, which he sort of beat, and then it all came back. But I mean, he made it to 84 nearly. It was just before his 84th birthday when he passed. I'm not quite sure how he managed that. He may have pickled himself, possibly, but it was a time when I thought, look, you've shut this guy out for such a long time. You don't know how much time you've got left, and Jane and I were friends at that point, my girlfriend, and she talked to me a lot about it and helped me deal with a lot of it, really, and helped me open up about it. And I think it's having that person there to actually talk to about these things, where they will just sit and listen. And I think that's made a big difference to me, certainly. And I think then from that point forward, I could actually, try and talk to Dad, and we never really talked about the drinking, not ever. We didn't talk about the years where I felt he missed out or I missed out. We just came to a sort of understanding of where we both were and how we felt about each other. And for the first time in, I don't know, 30 years maybe, nearly, I could tell him I loved him. Which was, that was a big deal, really.
It's wonderful that you had that gift of time.
Yeah.
To have some time with him and to express that you loved him.
Yeah. Yeah, I think now if I hadn't had that, I think I'd have probably carried it for the rest of my life. But the fact that I could do that, the fact that I took that time, I just looked past where we'd come from and just dealt with where we were right then, and he was my dad at the end of the day. And I do love him. I did love him, and I told him as much as I could, really, before he passed. So
that's wonderful, and shows the courage that you have to do the difficult thing and to overcome those barriers that you had built up over those years to step forward and to talk to him.
Yeah, I mean, it's the thing. Once you do it, it's easier every time. It is that massive first barrier you just have to push through, and it did take a lot, but I'm glad I did it. I really am.
Wonderful. And thinking about all of these years and this experience that you've been through with your dad, how do you think it's impacted your experience of being a parent now with your own children?
But I mean, I've tried to take, funnily enough, I tried to take a similar approach to my own dad in terms of alcohol and things like that. Mum and Dad introduced me to alcohol gradually over sort of my late teens kind of years. They were never demonizing anything, and I think that's kind of important, because I think there's this whole temptation, because of where I came from with Dad, to think, no, alcohol's really bad, you mustn't do this, don't go near this, don't do that, whatever you do, and that, I think that just pushes children to want it all the more, and just think this must be really awesome if you don't want to do it. Anytime you tell your kids not to do something, they're bound to want to do it. So I'm kind of glad that it hasn't pushed me down that road, but it has also made me, I think, very aware of how I am with my children in terms of being open with them, being available to them if they need me. Or, I've always said to them, if they don't want to talk to me, obviously, I'm their dad, who wants to talk to their dad, right? But I've always said to them, I'm here if you want to talk. Doesn't matter what it's about. There's no judgment. There's probably very little you're going to surprise me with. Then they generally do. So I think to an extent that has helped me in that regard, because it's made me think I don't want to be that closed book. I don't want to be someone who pushes them away if I can help it. I haven't always been the best dad necessarily, but I've done my best at the time. That's all you can do, really. I think my dad did. Unfortunately, he had this dog on his back that wouldn't let go, and he couldn't shake it. He didn't have the strength of will to just go, well, I'm not going to do it anymore, unfortunately.
Mm. So when you think back about your dad, what's a happy memory that you have of your dad?
It's quite a lot, really. We used to go to Guernsey a lot on holiday. So Dad and I used to go, it sounds ridiculous, right? We used to go crabbing and eeling, we'd call it. And the crab that we'd go out with basically kiddies' little fishing nets and spades and buckets, and we would catch the most enormous crabs on the beaches of Guernsey. I'm literally like, huge great things, and eels as well, like 1.5 foot long, with a stupid little kid's net, and it was just hilarious trying to scoop them into the buckets and whatnot. And Dad would shift these huge rocks because the tide goes out miles on the Guernsey beaches. It comes in for hours, and you'd have all these big rocks, and you turn them over, and everything would just scarper. So there's that. I mean, as I say, there's the barbecues in the garden. Dad playing the piano and blaring the music out, and even like in my later teens, we'd have barbecues in the back garden, things like that. So they're probably the sort of, I suppose they're the two things that spring to mind, really. The fun parties, and then the one thing me and Dad did do on our own together was going crabbing and eeling on the beach in Guernsey, which was cool.
Oh, that sounds brilliant. I think it's really important to get to a place where we can remember those happy memories, because quite often we can get caught in the chaos and the sadness of it all, and we forget the happy ones.
I mean, so for a long time I don't think I really thought about those memories. I thought every time Dad came to mind there was just this instant back up sort of just remembering the hiding of the drink, the drinking Mum's collection of miniatures and replacing what was in the bottles so it wouldn't look like he had. The time on holiday we almost had a fight because he was drunk and he was trying to tell me what to do and I was a bit too old for that. Things like that. And it's easy, just as you say, to just latch onto those memories and forget the other ones sometimes, but they were good memories, and it's good to remember them.
It's good to remember them, definitely. And if there's the one thing that people do after hearing this episode, is I'd like them to remember the happy times, think back and to the happy memories, because they are there, and to cherish those. So one last question for you, which I think is a really lovely way to end the episode, is what's something that you're grateful for?
Something that I'm grateful for? There's lots of things I'm grateful for, to be honest. I'm grateful for my children. I'm grateful for my girlfriend, my life, my career, the fact that I've got a roof over my head and food in my belly. I've kind of always been the eternal optimist. I think maybe that was part of getting through those years in my teenage years. I am Mr. Glass half full all the time, really. Probably to a fault, or maybe, I don't know, maybe it's gone too far, I don't know. But I think in life I've got a lot of things to be grateful. A lot of things to be grateful for, really. So
Oh, that's wonderful.
life
Thank you,
on
Simon.
the whole is good.
Good. Is having gratitude, I think, is incredibly important because it's creates a positive mindset, and as you say, the more positive you are, the more able you are to find solutions, and to not just focus on the challenging things that are happening in life.
Yeah.
So that's why I like to end with gratitude.
Gratitude is good.
I'm incredibly grateful, as I said in the beginning, for you to be here and to have this conversation with me. It's been lovely to share this time with you.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for sharing your story with others. I'm sure it will be helpful to somebody somewhere.
Well, I hope so. Yeah. I mean, I think maybe if I'd have heard something like that in those years, that might help me. I don't know, but we can but hope.
Yes, and we can all smile again.
Indeed. Yeah.
So thank you for joining me on Smiling Again.
No problem.
And it's lovely to see your smile. Perfect
And
time
you.
to say goodbye with a smile.
Okay.
Thank you, Simon.
Cheers.